Growth is a key element to this life, and the quickest way to growth, or maybe the best way to growth, is doing hard things. The harder things you do, the easier the easy things do. No, I'm sorry, that's not a sentence, but you know what I mean. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you exactly how I make 9 of the hardest and nicest chessboards I have ever made. So please sit back and relax, as I'm going to talk about every key component I integrated in these chessboards. As with any project, I start off with the raw material. In this case, that raw material is Maple Burl, an extremely sought after wood species used for guitar builds, high-end furniture projects, and even veneer because of that insane burl structure. And if you've watched any of my prior videos, I like to do these in-depth story times about the materials I'm using for my art piece in that specific video. And in this one, I'll be talking about Maple Burl and why it's so special. But back to woodworking, I start off by laying out a mold on top of the wood and getting a rough overview of how these chessboards are going to look like. Later, I'll talk more about the design effects I have integrated in these chessboards. For this project, I am using a few thicker slabs, and I did that intentionally because I wanted to add a few mirror-imaged or book-matched chessboards to this series. So I start off by flattening all the pieces, then I cut it with my table saw and do the rest by hand, which of course is very satisfying when you open up those two, as in this video. Very nice, yes. Now, I didn't really have a design for all of the chessboards. I had a few designs in my head, but one of the key factors is that I wanted the live edge really to look nice inside of these epoxy rivers. And one of the things I like to do is keep all the natural edges visible in the epoxy rivers. That way, if I don't like the design going with the chessboard, I can just leave it as is. And that is something I did in one of these chessboards, and in the rest I added a very sleek design, which you'll see later on in this video. Before that, I start cleaning the edges, which is an extremely important step by all epoxy builds. If the edges are not clean, well, first of all, you won't really see the nice details on the sides of the wood, but also the epoxy won't bond to the wood. It will instead bond to the bark or the cambium. And the cambium is a very thin layer on the outside of the wood, which you do not want the epoxy to bond to. So here I'm using a wire wheel inside of my drill, my Milwaukee drill. And I use Milwaukee because it's very strong and it's perfectly good for a project like this. After the edges are all clean, I really look with a magnifying glass. I'm joking, I don't do that, but I really try to look if there are any parts I missed. So this part is an extremely long process, and I make sure to clean everything up because that is really the basis you're setting for the entire project, and something I take my time for. Leaving the bark on could, however, be a nice design feature. I really like the bark on the side of this Maple Burl. I would love to leave it on if I could, but if I were to leave it on, this is how I would do it. First, I would loosen the bark slightly to pour some epoxy between the bark and the wood. Then it would become a solid. And then I use this thick setting epoxy, which is nearly like water, and I really let it seep into the wood and into the bark. After that, I would flatten the whole project like I'm going to do this one. And then I add a top layer of epoxy. Now, obviously, there are many steps between this, but that is how I would leave the bark on if I were to do a project like that. But just to make sure that these chessboards go for a lifetime, I want to make sure that I get the bark off, because I take no chances making a project that takes this long and not having a client for them yet. So now I can already hear some brains cracking by the wood lifetime. And the reason why these chessboards could last a lifetime or even longer starts with the epoxy resin. That part is very important. You really need the right supplier because epoxy resins from the 1980s didn't have UV blockers in them. And a lot of people still think the epoxy resin of now is the same thing as back then. But as everything, evolution got a hold of that. The epoxy resin I use from Polyester Shopper has the right amount of UV blocking systems in there. That does make the resins more expensive, but it also extends the lifetime of the epoxy. And with lifetime I mean mostly yellowing. Transparent epoxy resins can yellow over time, depending on where you put it. So if it's directly in the sun, it will have a different life than when it's in the shaded space. One technique I like to use to extend that even more is adding a dye or pigment into the epoxy. It doesn't block UV or anything like that, but if the epoxy ever yellows a little, it makes it almost invisible to the naked eye. You'll probably need a telescope or something like that to really notice it. The second reason something like this might not last a lifetime is if the wood isn't dried well. What I didn't mention at the start is that I tested the moisture content of the wood, and it was around 10 to 12%. That's perfect for this kind of project. If it's much lower, you can get higher cracks, and if it's much higher, the boards can warp or contract over time. And even after the boards are flattened with the epoxy between them, I like to give them more time to rest and dry, then I flatten them again until they're completely stable. This way, you do the most you can to make sure pieces like this last for the longest time possible. Which, as in any project, I really try to make high quality products because I don't like consuming things and then throwing them away after a year or two. I really like to make things that people are proud of and will have in their homes for, like I said, a lifetime. Now, a quick side note is that I tried a different type of look with one of these chessboards, and that is a green base layer, and someone liked it so much that he said via Instagram, because I like to post pictures and videos of the process on there, that he wanted it, and it was pre-ordered. Same with two of the other chessboards. This one here on screen is one of them as well, with the transparent base layer and a grey dye to add lifetime, which I would later add the design in as well. So that one is headed off to New York. There are still a few available, but I will tell you at the end of this video which ones are still available, and you can simply send me a message on Instagram as the others did, but you can also send me a message via my number or email. All the contact info will be down in the description. As with the other chessboards, I tried a different design. I added a black base layer, and my thoughts were going from the underneath to create a sort of special effect, which you'll also see later in this video. Right now I'm just breaking the bubbles and breaking the surface so all the air bubbles can go upwards. And something I already talked about was priming the wood and the edges. This is very important because the bubbles like to attach to porous materials like wood. So if you make it smooth with the epoxy resin, but not too smooth, then you can add a thick pour epoxy without any bubbles and without any troubles. When I say not too smooth, so the epoxy priming layer has to be sort of tacky. And with tacky, I mean if you put your nail in the epoxy or in the primer, it's sort of dense, but it doesn't stick to your finger. This is about after 12 hours, and then I like to pour the final layer of epoxy so it bonds to the already hardening priming layer. This is optimal, and I like to do it in every project with tables and art pieces like this one. Absolutely essential, something I like to do, as I said, in every project. Now for the story time. I know everyone likes a good little story time before bed. I do hope you do not go to bed after this video and you watch some more of my videos, but I'm going to give you a little story time about Maple Burl. If you really want to understand Maple Burl, you first have to understand that Maple Burl is not a tree species. That surprises a lot of people. Maple burl is actually a growth abnormality that forms on a maple tree, usually on species like big leaf maple or sugar maple. Trees that naturally grow across North America, especially in Canada, the northern United States and the Pacific Northwest. Big leaf maple in particular became one of the most valuable sources for burl because of its size, vigor and stability. These trees can grow over 30 meters tall and in some cases develop trunks over 1.4 meters in diameter. So what actually creates a burl? A burl forms when the tree experiences some kind of stress. That could be insect damage, fungal infection, physical trauma, environmental stress, or hormonal disruption in the cambium layer, the growth system of the tree. Normally, a tree grows in straight, organized grain because that's the most efficient way to move water and nutrition from the roots to the leaves. But when a burl forms, that normal growth pattern gets interrupted. Instead of fibers growing in one direction, thousands of dormant buds and growth points begin competing at the same time. The grain starts folding, twisting and compressing, growing in multiple directions at once. That's what creates those famous eyes, swirls, clusters and cloud-like pattern that Maple Burl is known for. And that's why no two species of Maple Burl ever look the same. Every burl is basically the tree's record of stress, survival and adaptation frozen into the wood. The shimmering 3D effect you see after oil or finish is applied happens because the light reflects differently of the fibers that are all pointing in different directions. That's what gives Maple Burl that depth that almost looks holographic. Historically, burl wood was not originally priced for luxury. It was priced because it was tough. Because the grain is so interlocked, burl wood often resists splitting better than straight grain wood in certain applications. That made it useful hundreds of years ago for hand-carved objects like bowls, cups, spoons, tools, boxes and other pieces that had to survive real use. In North America and parts of Europe, woodworkers and craftspeople used burl because it was strong, stable and beautiful. Even the beauty wasn't always the main reason back then. That changed during the 17th and 18th centuries. This is when figured woods and decorative veneers started becoming symbols of wealth in Europe. Furniture makers began slicing burls into veneer and applying them to cabinets, desks, writing boxes and fine furniture. Because the grain was so wild and impossible to copy, burl became associated with luxury and craftsmanship. Burl veneer remained popular through Art Deco furniture in the early 1900s and then had another huge rising during the 1960s and 1970s in high-end furniture and interior design. Even auction houses and modern design markets still connect burl strongly with that era. Then came another shift. Around the late 20th century and especially the 1990s into the 2000s, Maple Burl became highly sought after in specialty woodworking. Guitar builders started using it for tops and backs, knife makers started using it for scales, luxury car manufacturers started using burl veneers in dashboards and interiors, speaker companies, watchmakers, pen makers, jewelry box makers, basically anyone making something high-end started paying attention. Maple burl often has lighter cream, gold, amber and soft brown tones which make the figure extremely visible under oil, lacquer or epoxy. Unlike darker woods, where some figure can disappear, maple tends to reflect light beautifully and really show depth. Now let's talk value. Maple Burl is expensive because most of the tree is unusable for figured work. You're not buying lumber, you're pretty much buying rarity, and that's what I did with these boards. They were extremely expensive. A tree may grow for decades or even centuries before developing a usable burl, and even then, not every burl contains clean figure. Some have cracks, some have rot, some are too unstable, some don't cut well. So when woodworkers find a clean burl with strong figure, bookmatch potential and a strong moisture stability, the price climbs quickly. Small offcuts can often sell for $50 or more. Medium blocks often sell for a few $100s. Larger premium slabs or caps can easily run for $500 to well over $900 depending on size, figure, moisture content and how much usable material is actually inside. Veneer grade sheets also sell at a premium price because of how much yield can come from one clean cut. And that's really what Maple Burl is. It's not just a wood, it's decades of unpredictable growth, environmental pressure, natural damage, healing and survival, all locked into the grain that can never be repeated. And that's why I and so many other furniture makers just love this wood species. Sorry, it's not a species, but you know what I mean. Now, to end this story time, I really want to know your opinion on Maple Burl and these chessboards in general. So let me know down in the comments. And the most satisfying parts of these art pieces are yet to come. Now, while you were listening to the story time and just enjoying the video, you might have seen that the playing fields or the chess playing fields have been cut out by my CNC. Now, the CNC is precise on 1/10 of a millimeter, and I hand draw the playing fields first with design. So I have a curved element inside of the chess playing fields. So after I pour the epoxy, you have this sort of 3D effect, which is really nice. But the special design elements of these chessboards I will not show. And the simple reason for that is because I think there is certain beauty in not knowing how something is made. Now, I really enjoy walking through museums, old churches, and just looking up and thinking, wow, I do not understand how that was made. And I just think, as I said, there is certain beauty in that. Now, going back to some basic epoxy and woodworking tips. If you are working with epoxy, you are certainly going to have some cracks or voids after flattening your art piece. I like to then add another layer of epoxy, filling all those cracks and imperfections, but also priming and stabilizing the wood again, especially after making the grooves surrounding the chess playing fields. I like to give everything a priming layer. I do the underside as well, but that was not very interesting to look at as the top. And after the epoxy has dried, I like to use a scraper, which people normally use to scrape off paint from walls or such like. And I like to use it here. I need the chessboards to be dead flat, and using only a sander might cause dents or imperfections, so using a scraper first ensures that everything is nice and flat, then doing the final detailing with my sander. This is something you've seen in probably all my videos, if you've watched any of them, is cleaning the epoxy resin thoroughly. And because the epoxy resin is in multiple places on this chessboard, being in the playing fields and the line surrounding the playing fields, I really clean it well, because if you start sanding with a higher grit, you might get pigtails, and pigtails are extremely annoying to get rid of. So that's a very important step, and I will keep repeating it because it's such an important step. After the rough sanding is complete and the chessboard is fully flat, I like to add a chamfer on the underside. This makes the whole chessboard easier to lift up from the underside, especially adding the golden feet later in this video, but also giving the chessboard a lighter overall look. And now I want to tell a small personal story time, because I haven't really talked a lot about my own experiences and how I got to where I am now. Lately, I've been getting a lot of messages, and I've also been seeing a lot of young people starting woodworking companies. So I just want to give a little push in the back to anyone listening who really wants to follow their dreams. When I was in secondary school or high school, depending on where you're from, I had to choose what college I was going to. And at that age, it kind of feels like that decision is going to decide the rest of your life. I was around 15 or 16 years old at the time, and honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I did find out I was quite handy with my hands. And that started at home, thanks to my dad making a few things in the garage. That's where I first noticed I really liked building things. So I chose to go to the HMC in Rotterdam, which is a really well-known furniture making school in Holland. And that school is beautiful. The building, the workshops, the machinery side, everything. I got to make some really nice furniture there, and I learned a lot. But at the same time, I couldn't help feeling like I was being pushed towards a certain route. And that route was mass-produced furniture. Now, mass-produced furniture nowadays is better than it was a few years ago, because the industry is moving really, really fast. But still, the idea of making furniture, knowing it might fall apart in 10 years, just wasn't it for me. I wanted to make things that would last a lifetime or even longer. I wanted to make pieces where you can see the reaction on people's faces when they receive them. Something personal, something made with real attention. I started my company nearly a decade ago while I was still in school. I started in my shed making small cutting boards and smaller objects that I could sell. And pretty quickly I noticed that epoxy resin was a hot topic at the time. But most epoxy projects back then were just resin tables. 2 slabs of wood, resin pulled in between, and that was it. And I remember thinking, wood is so expensive and so beautiful, it feels like a shame to just throw resin between 2 planks and call it a day. I already knew back then that I wanted to go in a different direction. I wanted to make high-end furniture and real art pieces. While I was still in school, I started thinking about the route I was going to take. I also had a few internships, and my first one was honestly not a good experience. Every day felt like the same grey, boring day. Maybe it was the company, maybe the structure, or maybe it was me. But it made me seriously worry about my life, because I thought, if this is what the rest of my life is going to look like, I'm not going to be happy. So I had a choice. Either stop and do something else, or keep going and try to do something different. Something no one around me was really doing. Or at least become so good at what I do that I can make whatever I wanted for whoever I wanted. And that is pretty much the route I'm still on today. These chessboards I'm making now would not have been possible if I had gone down the mass production furniture route. And to be honest, I'm really happy I didn't. This chessboard series is kind of a reflection of where I am at right now, and I'm proud of that. But back to school, at the beginning of my 3rd year, I stopped. I went full-time into woodworking, and I have to be honest, the beginning was rough, very rough. But slowly, things started picking up. I started finding the right clients, and now for many years I've been able to work on 4 or 5 absolutely exclusive projects per year for clients who really appreciate my work. And to go deeper on this story, or into this story, because I really want to connect with the person watching this who is thinking about starting something for themselves is to give a few tips, some things I've learned over the years doing this. Something I've really noticed over the years is that communication is extremely important. And honestly, that probably counts for every market. But when you're making personal high-end pieces, the communication with the clients becomes just as important as the piece itself. For me, I really like working directly with people. I like having personal contact, and I think the people who collect my work also appreciate that. They're not talking to a random company or salesperson. They're talking directly to the person who designs it, makes it, delivers it, and also takes responsibility for it. And that brings me to one of the most important things I've learned: how you fix a problem. Because things can go wrong, we're all human at the same time. Mistakes happen. But the way you handle those moments is what really stays with people. In some cases, solving a problem properly can leave a stronger impression than when everything goes perfectly from the beginning. If something is wrong, I'm the one who they can come to, and I'm also the one who fixes it. That responsibility is a big part of working in this way, and I think it's one of the reasons why personal contact matters so much. So I really hope this inspires someone watching to follow their dreams and keep going, because to be honest, I sometimes have to remind myself that where I am right now is really special, and I'm really grateful for that. Now, I think it would be really interesting if you could leave some thoughts or questions in the comments, which I can answer in the next video. So whatever age you are, just leave a question and we can talk about it in the next video, and you can leave your thoughts again in that comment section, and then we can talk about it in the next video. I think that would be really cool, just to learn more about each other, and yeah, I think that would be quite interesting. So now back to woodworking, because I am nearly done with these chessboards. In the meantime, I've engraved my signature on the back of each board, together with a number from #1 to #9. Every chessboard in this series is unique, so the number makes it very clear which one is which, and which one you might be interested in. So if you want one of these chessboards, you can simply send me a message. All of my contact details will be down in the description. I'm also adding gold feet to the underside of the boards. This gives them a slightly lifted look when they sit on a flat table, and it adds a bit more depth and elegance to the overall piece. For the chess pieces, there are different options. One option is the epoxy chess pieces, which I make myself, but I also understand that not everyone wants epoxy pieces, and some chess players already have their own set that they would like to use on a board like this. So I mainly wanted to focus on the chessboards themselves. If you would like a special set of wooden pieces added to your chessboard, you can also send me a message and we can discuss that. Everything is possible to talk through. To finish the boards, I primed both the top and the bottom. After that cured, I sanded the top again and added the final top coat of epoxy resin. I did 2 coats just to add a little more depth to the surface. After that, I started the polishing process. On a few boards, I tried a different polishing method. Normally, when you use an orbital sander or polishing machine, you get very fine circular scratches. Of course, these are polished out, and the board gets a really nice shine. But I wanted to test a finish that would stay looking good even after the board is actually used. Because this is still a chessboard, of course, it's made to be played on. So the goal was not only to make it shine, but also to make sure you won't immediately see small marks once people start playing chess on it. I started sanding at grit 600 and worked my way up to 4000. Then I used a polishing compound to remove the deeper sanding marks. And after that, I used a final cut polish to bring the shine fully to the surface. You also may have noticed that there is one chessboard in particular that stands out from the rest, and that is because that chessboard is made from walnut and has a very light blue base layer. This is a one-of-one chessboard that I started over a year ago, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to finish this chessboard, and I thought that the exact same steps I would have for this chessboard series of 9 would be a nice addition to the chessboard I was already making. So that's a one-of-one chessboard. It's up for sale right now, and if you want it, you can also send me a message. I'm really a fan of the light blue coloring in the epoxy resin with the walnut. It's just absolutely stunning. For the underside of the chessboard, I didn't film the priming layer of epoxy resin, but it's exactly the same process as I used on the top. After the epoxy was fully cured, I sanded that layer flush with the wood again. Then I added a oil-based finish, which really brings out the depth and the grain of this beautiful Maple Burl. So with that, this project comes to an end. Almost 3 months of work, planning, problem solving, sanding, polishing, and everything in between, and trying to get every detail right. Now, all 9 chessboards are finished.